The winter wind cut through the mountain pass like a blade, and Jonas Crawford could barely see 3 feet ahead through the swirling snow as he made his way home from checking the northern fence line of his late father's ranch. He had not expected to find anyone out in this weather, certainly not a half-frozen orc girl huddled against the rocky outcropping that marked the boundary between his land and the wild territories beyond. She was shivering violently, her green skin taking on an ashen hue that spoke of dangerous cold, her breath coming in short gasps that formed small clouds in the frigid air. Her clothing was torn and inadequate for the weather, just thin leather wrappings that might have been suitable for summer but were worse than useless now. Jonas did not think, did not hesitate despite years of teaching that orcs were dangerous, were enemies, were to be avoided or driven off. He simply unwound the thick woolen shawl from around his own neck, the one his mother had knitted in the last months before the fever took her, and wrapped it carefully around the orc girl's trembling shoulders. She flinched at first, her amber eyes going wide with fear and confusion, her small tusks catching the dim light as she opened her mouth to speak but found no words. Jonas held up his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace, though his fingers were already going numb from the cold without the protection of the shawl. "You will freeze to death out here," he said simply, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "My house is not far. Can you walk?" The orc girl stared at him for a long moment, and Jonas could see the war happening behind her eyes, the instinct to flee battling against the very real danger of the storm. Finally, she nodded, a jerky motion that might have been as much from the shivering as from agreement. Jonas offered his arm, and after another hesitation, she took it, her grip surprisingly strong despite her weakened state. Together they pushed through the deepening snow, Jonas leading the way by memory more than sight, following the fence line that he had walked 1,000 times since boyhood. The journey that normally took 15 minutes stretched to nearly an hour, each step a battle against the wind and the accumulating drifts. The orc girl stumbled twice, and both times Jonas caught her, feeling how light she was, how the cold had sapped her strength. He could feel her shaking even through both their layers of clothing, could hear her teeth chattering despite her obvious efforts to stay silent. When the dark shape of his ranch house finally emerged from the white chaos, Jonas felt a surge of relief so strong it nearly buckled his knees. Getting her inside was a clumsy affair of fumbling with frozen latches and half carrying her over the threshold. Jonas kicked the door shut behind them, immediately moving to stoke up the fire that he had banked that morning. The orc girl stood where he had left her, dripping melting snow onto the wooden floor, the shawl still clutched around her shoulders, her eyes darting around the room as if cataloging escape routes. Jonas tried to see his home through her eyes. The simple furniture his father had built, the kitchen area with its well-stocked shelves, the stairs leading up to the sleeping loft, the rifle mounted over the fireplace. That last made her tense, he noticed, her body coiling as if ready to bolt. "I am not going to hurt you," Jonas said softly, keeping his movements slow and deliberate as he coaxed the fire back to life. "You are safe here, I promise." He was not sure she believed him, was not entirely sure why he was doing this at all, except that the memory of his mother's gentle voice insisted that all life was precious, that kindness was never wasted, that what separated civilized folk from savages was not the color of their skin, but the content of their character. The fire caught and grew, spreading blessed warmth through the room. Jonas stood and turned to find the orc girl watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Up close, in better light, he could see that she was young, perhaps his own age of 22 or maybe a bit younger, with delicate features that contradicted everything he had been told about orc brutishness. Her skin was the color of spring leaves, marked here and there with darker patterns that might have been tribal tattoos or natural markings. Her hair was long and black, currently plastered to her skull with melting snow, and her ears came to elegant points that somehow made her look more vulnerable rather than threatening. "What is your name?" Jonas asked, moving to the kitchen to put a kettle on for tea. He could feel her eyes following him, tracking every movement with the wariness of a wild animal. For a long moment she did not answer, and Jonas thought perhaps she did not speak the common tongue. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, "Karga." Her voice was rough, whether from disuse or from the cold he could not tell, but there was a musical quality to it underneath, like gravel in a stream. "Karga," Jonas repeated, trying to pronounce it the way she had, with the emphasis on the first syllable. "I am Jonas Crawford. This is my ranch, or what is left of it anyway. Just me now since my father passed last spring." He was not sure why he was telling her this, why he felt compelled to fill the silence with details of his life. Perhaps it was simply that he had spoken to no one but himself and the livestock for months, and the loneliness had built up like water behind a dam. Karga said nothing, but she moved closer to the fire, her shivering beginning to subside as the warmth penetrated her chilled flesh. Jonas found himself studying her from the corner of his eye as he prepared the tea, noting the way she held herself, the proud set of her shoulders despite her obvious exhaustion and fear. She was taller than he had initially thought, perhaps only a few inches shorter than his own 6 feet, with a lean, athletic build that spoke of a hard life lived in constant motion. The tea was ready, and Jonas poured 2 cups, carrying one over to where Karga stood by the fire. She took it with a mumbled word that might have been thanks, wrapping both hands around the warm ceramic and breathing in the steam. Jonas watched as she took a tentative sip, saw her eyes widen slightly at the taste. He had sweetened it with honey, the way his mother always had, and he hoped it would help restore some of her strength. They stood in silence for a while, drinking their tea, the crackling of the fire the only sound. Outside, the storm continued to rage, the wind rattling the shutters and howling down the chimney. Jonas knew that no one would be going anywhere tonight, possibly not for several days if the storm proved as severe as it seemed. The thought of being trapped in this small house with an orc stranger should have made him nervous, should have sent him reaching for the rifle, but instead he felt an odd sense of calm, almost of rightness. "Are you hungry?" Jonas asked when both their cups were empty. Karga nodded, a quick, almost embarrassed motion. Jonas smiled and moved to the kitchen, pulling down a pot and beginning to assemble ingredients for a stew. It was simple fare: venison from a deer he had shot the week before, root vegetables from his cellar, dried herbs from the bundles hanging on the wall. But it was hearty and warm and would help chase away the last of the cold from both their bones. As he worked, Jonas was aware of Karga watching him, still cautious but with some of the tension leaving her frame. She had settled into his father's old chair by the fire, his mother's shawl still wrapped around her shoulders, and in the warm light, she looked less like the savage monster he had been taught to fear, and more like a lost soul seeking shelter from a cruel world. "How did you come to be out in the storm?" Jonas asked as he chopped vegetables, his knife moving with the practiced ease of someone who had been cooking for himself for a long time. "The orc territories are a good 20 miles from here, and this weather came on fast." "You must have been traveling for days to have made it this far into human lands." Karga was silent for so long that Jonas thought she would not answer. Then, her voice low and bitter, she said, "I was cast out, exiled. I am no longer welcome among my people." Jonas set down his knife and turned to face her fully, surprised by the pain in her voice. "Exiled? For what?" "For showing mercy to a human child," Karga said, her hands clenching into fists on her lap. "There was a raid months ago, a farmstead near the border. I was there, part of the war party, because that is what orcs do, yes. We raid and kill and take what we want. But there was a child, a little girl no more than 5 summers old, hiding in a root cellar. The others wanted to kill her, said she would grow up to be our enemy, but I could not. I hid her, told them the cellar was empty, and later that night I brought her to the edge of the human village and left her where she would be found." She paused, taking a shuddering breath, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears. "Someone saw me, reported what I had done. The chieftain called me weak, called me a traitor to my clan. He said I had dishonored my ancestors and that I was no longer one of them. So they stripped me of my weapons, my armor, everything but the clothes I wore, and drove me out into the wilderness. That was 3 days ago. I have been walking ever since, trying to find somewhere, anywhere that I might survive. But there is nowhere for an orc in human lands, and I cannot return to my people." Jonas felt something twist in his chest, a combination of anger at the injustice and sympathy for this woman who had sacrificed everything for a moment of compassion. He returned to his cooking, but his mind was working, turning over possibilities. "You can stay here," he heard himself say, the words out before he had fully thought them through. "At least until the storm passes and you are strong enough to travel. After that, well, we can figure something out." Karga stared at him as if he had sprouted a second head. "You would shelter me." "An orc? Do you not fear what your neighbors will say, what they will do if they discover you have harbored one of the enemy?" Jonas shrugged, stirring the stew as it began to bubble. "My nearest neighbor is 10 miles away, and they mind their own business as I mind mine. As for what they would say, well, I stopped caring about that when they all vanished like smoke after my father's funeral, leaving me to run this place alone. They were happy enough to accept his help when they needed it, happy to come to his table and drink his whiskey and benefit from his wisdom, but the moment he was gone, so were they. So no, I do not much care what anyone thinks." The bitterness in his own voice surprised him, but it was true. The isolation of the past months had been harder than he wanted to admit. The loneliness, a constant ache that he had tried to bury under endless work. Having someone, anyone in the house again, even an orc exile, felt like a balm to a wound he had not realized was so deep. Dinner was ready, and Jonas ladled out 2 generous portions into wooden bowls, handing one to Karga along with a spoon. She took it with a whispered thanks, and they ate in silence, the food disappearing quickly. Jonas noticed that Karga ate with surprising delicacy, despite her obvious hunger, her manners better than some of the human men he had known. When both bowls were empty, Jonas collected them and set them aside to be washed later, too tired to deal with them now. The storm outside showed no signs of abating, and the darkness beyond the windows was absolute. Jonas banked the fire and lit a few candles, their soft light casting dancing shadows on the walls. He showed Karga where the privy was, a small room off the back of the house that his father had added years ago so they would not have to brave the outhouse in winter. And while she was occupied, he quickly made up a bed for her on the couch near the fire, using spare blankets and pillows from the chest in the corner. When Karga emerged, looking confused by the indoor plumbing but saying nothing, Jonas gestured to the makeshift bed. "You can sleep here. I will be upstairs in the loft if you need anything. There is more wood for the fire in the box, and help yourself to food or water if you wake hungry or thirsty." Karga stared at the bed, then at Jonas, then back at the bed. "I do not understand you," she said finally, her voice thick with confusion and something that might have been the beginning of trust. "You are human. I am orc. We are supposed to be enemies. Why do you show me such kindness?" Jonas considered the question, trying to find words for something he did not fully understand himself. "My mother used to say that kindness is not a finite resource, that sharing it does not diminish what you have but multiplies it. I think she would have wanted me to help you. I think she would have said that your life, your well-being, matters just as much as anyone else's, regardless of what you are." He paused, then added softly, "And maybe I am just tired of being alone." Something in Karga's expression shifted, softened, and for the first time since he had found her, she smiled, a small, tentative expression that transformed her face. "Then I will stay, Jonas Crawford, at least for a while, and I will try to repay your kindness however I can." Jonas nodded, feeling an answering smile tug at his own lips. "Sleep well, Karga. Tomorrow is another day, and who knows what it will bring." He climbed the stairs to the loft, leaving her to settle in by the fire. From his bed, he could hear the soft sounds of her moving around, the rustle of blankets, the creak of the couch as she lay down. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the world, but inside, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Jonas Crawford did not feel alone. He fell asleep with that thought warming him more thoroughly than any fire could. Jonas woke to the smell of cooking, and for a moment, still foggy with sleep, thought his mother was downstairs preparing breakfast as she had every morning of his childhood. Then memory returned, and he sat up quickly, suddenly uncertain what he would find when he descended the ladder. The rational part of his mind, the part that had been shaped by years of warnings about orcs, whispered that he might find his home ransacked, his food stolen, the orc girl long gone. But a deeper instinct, the same one that had made him offer his mother's shawl to a stranger in the snow, told him that Karga was still there, that she would not betray his trust. He was right. When he climbed down, he found Karga at the stove, carefully tending a pan of eggs and some of the bacon from his smokehouse. She had found his mother's apron hanging on a peg and tied it around her waist, and the domestic sight of an orc woman cooking breakfast in his kitchen was so surreal that Jonas had to blink several times to convince himself he was truly awake. Karga turned at the sound of his footsteps and offered him another of those small, careful smiles. "I hope you do not mind. I woke early and thought I should make myself useful. You have been very generous and I would not be a burden." "You are not a burden," Jonas said automatically, moving to the window to peer out at the weather. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a world transformed into white silence. Snow drifts reached halfway up the fence posts, and the sky was that peculiar pale blue that promised more cold to come. "It looks like we got at least 2 feet, maybe more in places. The passes will be blocked for days." "Then I will stay and help until they clear," Karga said firmly, sliding eggs onto 2 plates and adding several strips of bacon to each. "You have given me shelter and food when you had no reason to do so. The least I can do is make myself useful while I am here." They ate breakfast together, and Jonas found himself studying Karga in the clear morning light. The ashen tinge had left her skin, replaced by a healthy green glow, and her eyes were bright and alert. She had somehow managed to wash and dry her hair, which now fell in a thick braid down her back, and though her clothes were still worn and inadequate, she carried herself with a dignity that demanded respect. After breakfast, Jonas showed Karga around the ranch, or at least as much of it as they could reach through the snow. He had a small herd of cattle, a dozen chickens in a coop attached to the barn, 2 horses, and a milk cow. There were fields that would need plowing come spring, fences that needed mending, 100 tasks that had been slowly overwhelming him since his father's death. Karga listened carefully as he explained the work, asking intelligent questions and absorbing information with a quickness that impressed him. They spent that first day digging out from the storm, clearing paths from the house to the barn and from the barn to the animal shelters, breaking ice in water troughs, making sure all the livestock had survived the cold. Karga worked tirelessly, her orc strength making tasks that would have taken Jonas hours alone pass much more quickly. He noticed that she was careful never to get too close to him, always maintaining a respectful distance, as if afraid that familiarity would make him reconsider his hospitality. By evening, they were both exhausted but satisfied, the essential work done and the animals all safe and fed. Jonas made dinner this time, a simple meal of fried potatoes and sausage, and they ate while discussing plans for the next day. It felt strange how quickly this had become normal, how easily they had fallen into a rhythm of shared work and shared space. Jonas kept waiting for the fear or suspicion he had been taught to feel toward orcs to manifest, but it never did. Karga was just Karga, a person who worked hard and spoke little but whose presence made the house feel less empty. That night, as Jonas lay in his loft bed listening to the settling sounds of the house, he found himself thinking about what would happen when the passes cleared, when Karga would have to make a choice about where to go next. The thought of her leaving left a hollow feeling in his chest that he did not want to examine too closely. It was too soon, he told himself, too soon to be feeling anything beyond simple human compassion for someone in need. But his heart, it seemed, was not listening to his head. The days fell into a pattern. They rose with the sun, shared breakfast, and then divided the work of the ranch between them. Karga proved to have a way with the animals, her quiet confidence calming even the most skittish of the chickens, and she took over most of the barn work while Jonas focused on repairs and maintenance that had been piling up. They ate lunch together, worked through the afternoon, and then shared dinner and the evening by the fire. Slowly, carefully, they began to talk beyond simple necessities. Karga told Jonas about her life in the Orc clan, about the constant warfare and raiding that defined their existence, about the rigid hierarchy and the harsh punishments for any perceived weakness. She spoke of her mother, who had died in childbirth with a second child that did not survive, and her father, a warrior who had fallen in battle when Karga was barely old enough to remember his face. She had been raised by the clan, taught to fight and hunt and survive, but some part of her had always questioned the endless cycle of violence, had wondered if there was more to life than killing and taking. Jonas, in turn, shared stories of his own childhood, of his parents and the ranch, of the dreams he and his father had once had of expanding the operation, maybe getting some sheep, possibly even hiring some help. He spoke of the loneliness after his mother's death, the way his father had slowly faded without her, losing the will to live until the sickness took him just a few months later. He admitted that he had considered selling the ranch and moving to one of the larger towns, starting over somewhere where every corner did not hold memories of loss. "Why did you not?" Karga asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Jonas mending a harness while Karga worked on repairing one of her worn leather wrappings with some spare leather and tools he had provided. Jonas was quiet for a moment, considering. "I guess because this place is all I have left of them. My father built this house with his own hands, cleared these fields, raised these fences. My mother planted the herb garden, knitted the curtains, made this place a home. If I leave, if I let it all go, then it is like they never existed, like all their work and love meant nothing. I cannot do that to them, even if staying here means being alone." Karga set down her work and looked at him with an expression that was almost tender. "You are not alone now," she said softly. "No," Jonas agreed, meeting her amber gaze. "No, I am not." Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of a bond that had formed almost without their noticing, a connection that transcended the supposed boundaries of their different peoples. Jonas felt his heart rate pick up, felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spreading through his chest. He wanted to say something, to give voice to the feelings that were growing stronger each day, but fear held his tongue. What could he offer her after all? A life of hiding on a remote ranch, cut off from both their peoples, forever looking over their shoulders. She deserved better than that, deserved freedom and acceptance, and a place where she could be herself without fear. The moment passed, and they returned to their work. But Jonas could not shake the feeling that something had shifted, that they were standing on the edge of something that could be beautiful or devastating, depending on whether they had the courage to step forward or the wisdom to step back. A week after Karga's arrival, Jonas woke to find a break in the weather, the sun shining bright and the temperature rising enough that the snow had begun to melt, forming small rivulets that ran down the mountain and fed the half-frozen stream that cut through his property. He knew that this meant the passes would clear soon, that Karga would be able to leave if she chose, and the knowledge sat in his stomach like a stone. He said nothing about it at breakfast, and Karga, if she noticed the change in weather, made no comment either. They went about their work as usual, but there was a tension in the air, an awareness that their little bubble of isolation was about to burst. Jonas found himself drawing out every task, taking longer than necessary, as if by slowing down he could hold back time itself. It was mid-afternoon when they heard the sound of horses approaching. Jonas and Karga were in the barn, working together to muck out the stalls, when the whinny of an unfamiliar animal made them both freeze. Jonas felt his blood run cold, sudden fear gripping him. No one should be out this way, not in this weather, not without good reason. He moved to the barn door and peered out, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. 3 riders were approaching the house, and even from a distance, Jonas could make out the glint of weapons and the hard set of their postures. These were not neighbors come to check on him after the storm. These were men looking for something or someone, and Jonas had a sinking feeling he knew what. "Get in the loft," Jonas hissed to Karga, his mind racing. "Hide in the hay, do not come down no matter what you hear." Karga's eyes went wide, but she did not argue, moving quickly to climb the ladder to the barn's upper level. Jonas waited until he heard her settle, then took a deep breath and walked out to meet the riders, plastering what he hoped was a casual expression on his face. The 3 men reined in their horses as Jonas approached, their eyes scanning him and the property with the assessing gaze of experienced trackers. The leader, a hard-faced man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, leaned forward in his saddle. "Name is Garrett," he said without preamble. "We are hunting an orc that was seen in this area a week ago, just before the storm. Green skin, female, young. You seen anything like that?" Jonas forced himself to meet the man's gaze steadily, to keep his breathing even and his expression neutral. "Cannot say that I have. Been snowed in since the storm hit, have not seen anyone. Why are you looking for an orc this far into human territory anyway? The clans usually stay in the mountains this time of year." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "This one is a rogue, cast out by her own people for being soft on humans. We have orders from the Border Council to bring her in. There is a bounty for orcs taken alive, and we aim to collect. Are you sure you have not seen anything? No tracks, no sign of anything unusual." "Nothing," Jonas lied, his heart pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it. "Like I said, been snowed in. You are the first people I have seen in over a week." One of the other men, younger with a mean twist to his mouth, spoke up. "Mind if we take a look around, just to be sure?" Jonas felt ice form in his veins, but he kept his expression calm. "I do mind, actually. This is private property, and I do not take kindly to strangers poking around my home without cause. The orc you are looking for obviously moved on or did not make it through the storm. Either way, she is not here, and I have work to do. So if you will excuse me, I would appreciate it if you moved along." Garrett stared at him for a long, tense moment, and Jonas could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Finally, the man nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But if you do see anything, there is a reward. 20 silver pieces for information leading to her capture. Keep that in mind." "I will do that," Jonas said, his voice flat. He stood and watched as the three men turned their horses and rode back the way they had come, not moving until they were out of sight over the ridge. Then and only then did he let out the breath he had been holding and hurry back to the barn. "Karga," he called softly. "They are gone. You can come down." There was a rustling from above, and Karga descended the ladder, her face pale beneath her green skin, her eyes wide with fear. "They are hunting me," she said, her voice shaking. "They will not stop. They will come back, and when they do, they will search more thoroughly. You could be arrested for harboring me, Jonas. You could be fined or imprisoned or worse. I have to leave. I have to go now before I bring more trouble to your door." "No," Jonas said firmly, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. He crossed to where she stood and took her hands in his, holding them tightly. "No, you are not going anywhere. Those men are bounty hunters, the worst kind of scavengers. They do not care about justice or law, they just want the silver. I will not let them take you." "But Jonas, you could lose everything," Karga protested, tears now streaming down her face. "Your ranch, your freedom, maybe even your life." "I am not worth that. I am just an orc, an exile, nothing and no one. You owe me nothing." "You are wrong," Jonas said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are not nothing. You are brave and kind and strong, and you saved a child when it cost you everything. You work harder than anyone I have ever met, and you have made this place feel like a home again instead of just a house full of ghosts. I do not care what those men say. I do not care about their bounty or their orders. You are staying here, and we will figure out how to keep you safe." Karga stared at him, her amber eyes searching his face as if looking for any sign of deception or doubt. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly, her tears still falling but her expression firming with resolve. "Then we will need a plan. Those men will return, and when they do, we need to be ready." They spent the rest of the afternoon and evening preparing. Jonas cleared out a small space in the root cellar beneath the house, a hiding place where Karga could stay if the bounty hunters returned. He moved supplies down there, blankets and food and water, enough to last several days if necessary. Karga helped, her movements quick and efficient despite the fear Jonas could see lingering in her eyes. That night, neither of them could sleep. Jonas lay in his loft bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind churning with worry and plans and the growing certainty that his feelings for Karga had gone far beyond simple compassion or friendship. He cared for her, cared deeply, in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The thought of those men taking her, hurting her, selling her like livestock, made him feel violent in a way he had never experienced before. Downstairs, he could hear Karga moving restlessly, and after an hour of tossing and turning, Jonas gave up on sleep and climbed down to find her sitting by the dying fire, his mother's shawl wrapped around her shoulders, staring into the embers. "Cannot sleep either?" Jonas asked softly, settling into the chair beside her. Karga shook her head. "Every sound makes me think they are coming back. I know it is foolish that they would not travel at night, but I cannot help it. I keep thinking about what will happen if they catch me, what they will do." Jonas reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. The gesture felt natural, right, as if they had been doing this for years instead of barely more than a week. "I will not let them catch you," he said firmly. "I promise you that, Karga. Whatever it takes, I will keep you safe." Karga turned to look at him, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the coals, and Jonas saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes, that same mixture of fear and hope and something deeper, something that made his breath catch. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk so much for me?" Jonas knew that this was the moment, that he could deflect or change the subject or make some excuse about basic human decency, but he found he did not want to. The truth sat on his tongue, demanding to be spoken, and so he let it. "Because I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I know it is fast. I know it is impossible. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is the worst idea I have ever had, but I cannot seem to help it. You have brought light back into my life, Karga. You have made me remember what it feels like to wake up with purpose, to look forward to the day instead of just enduring it. I cannot let them take you because I cannot imagine this place, my life, without you in it anymore." For a moment, Karga just stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, radiant and joyful and more beautiful than anything Jonas had ever seen. "I thought I was the only one feeling this way," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I told myself I was being foolish, that you were just being kind, that there was no way a human could ever feel for an orc what I was beginning to feel for you. But Jonas, from that first moment when you wrapped your mother's shawl around my shoulders, when you chose kindness over fear, I felt something change inside me. You have shown me that the world does not have to be the brutal, violent place my clan taught me it was. You have given me hope that maybe, just maybe, there is a place for me in this world after all." Jonas felt his heart swell until it seemed too large for his chest, felt a joy so pure and intense it was almost painful. He stood and pulled Karga to her feet, and then, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. Her lips were soft and warm, her tusks a strange but not unpleasant presence against his mouth, and when she kissed him back, winding her arms around his neck and pulling him closer, Jonas felt like he had finally found the thing he had been searching for all his life without knowing it. They broke apart after a long moment, both breathing hard, and Jonas rested his forehead against hers, savoring the closeness, the rightness of having her in his arms. "We will figure this out," he murmured. "I do not know how yet, but we will find a way to be together, to build a life where you do not have to hide, where we can just be ourselves." "Together," Karga echoed, the words sounding like a promise and a prayer all at once. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the darkness, and when they finally parted to return to their separate beds, Jonas felt like something fundamental had shifted in the universe. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, and that made all the difference. The bounty hunters did not return the next day or the day after that, and slowly the tension began to ease. Jonas and Karga fell back into their work routine, but now there was an added dimension to their interactions, a tenderness in the way they spoke to each other, the casual touches that grew more frequent, the stolen kisses in the barn or by the fire. Jonas felt like he was walking on air, his happiness so complete that he sometimes had to remind himself to stay vigilant, to remember that the danger had not passed, only receded for the moment. 2 weeks after the bounty hunter's visit, Jonas made a decision. He saddled up one of the horses and rode into the small town of Millbrook, the nearest settlement and the place where his father had always sold their cattle and bought supplies. It was a risk, he knew, but he needed information, needed to understand what was happening beyond the borders of his ranch. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, a blacksmith, a tavern, and a handful of houses. Jonas tied up his horse and went into the general store, nodding to the proprietor, a gray-haired woman named Martha who had known his parents. "Jonas Crawford," Martha said, surprise evident in her voice. "Have not seen you since your father's funeral. How are you managing out there all alone?" "Well enough," Jonas said carefully. "Came in for some supplies and to see if there was any news. Heard there were bounty hunters in the area a couple weeks back." Martha's expression darkened. "Nasty business, that. Bunch of thugs from down south, claiming to have authorization from the Border Council to hunt down rogue orcs. They have been prowling around, stirring up trouble, accusing people of harboring enemies. Most folks are staying out of their way, but there has been talk. Some think the council is overstepping, using fear of orcs to justify actions that are not legal or right." Jonas felt a surge of hope. "So not everyone supports what they are doing?" Martha shook her head. "No, indeed. There are those of us who remember a time when humans and orcs traded peacefully, before the wars started. My own grandfather had an orc friend, used to come and work the harvest together every fall. Not all orcs are savages, no matter what the council wants us to believe. But people are afraid, Jonas. Afraid of being different, afraid of standing out. So they keep their heads down and their mouths shut." Jonas bought his supplies, carefully casual as he gathered flour and sugar and other staples, and then headed to the tavern for a drink and more information. The place was nearly empty in the afternoon, just a few old-timers nursing beers and trading stories. Jonas sat at the bar and ordered a whiskey, listening with half an ear to the conversation around him. "I hear they caught an orc down near Riversend," one man was saying. "Young male, said he was trying to find work as a farmhand. They beat him pretty bad before dragging him off to who knows where." "Shameful," another man muttered. "Since when do we treat people like animals just for being different? My Susie married a man from the eastern tribes, and he looks about as human as an orc does, all dark-skinned and foreign. Should we start hunting him too?" The conversation drifted to other topics, but Jonas had heard enough. The bounty hunters were still active, still dangerous, but there were also people who did not agree with their methods, who might be willing to help if the situation became desperate. It was not much, but it was something. He returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, finding Karga in the barn feeding the horses. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. "You are back. I was starting to worry." "I am fine," Jonas assured her, setting down his purchases and moving to pull her into his arms. "Just needed to get a sense of what is happening in the wider world. The bounty hunters are still around, but there is also resistance, people who do not agree with what they are doing. We are not as alone as I feared." Karga rested her head against his chest, and Jonas could feel the tension in her body, the constant low-level fear that she carried. "I wish we could just run away," she murmured. "Find somewhere far from here where no one knows us, where we could just be Jonas and Karga, not human and orc." "Maybe we will," Jonas said, stroking her hair. "Maybe once spring comes and travel is easier, we can pack up and head west, find some unclaimed land and start over. But for now, we stay here, we stay careful, and we stay together." They stood there in the warm dimness of the barn, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the animals, and Jonas felt a fierce protectiveness surge through him. Whatever came, he would keep Karga safe. He would find a way for them to have the life they both wanted, or he would die trying. Spring came slowly to the mountains. the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing the dead grass and muddy earth beneath. Jonas and Karga worked together to prepare the fields for planting, turning the soil and clearing rocks, planning what crops to grow and where. It was hard work, but satisfying, and the physical labor helped burn off some of the nervous energy that came from constantly looking over their shoulders. They had settled into a comfortable domesticity, sharing the house and the bed in the loft, though they had not yet taken their relationship beyond kissing and holding each other. It was not for lack of desire on either side, but rather a mutual sense that they should wait, that such a step should come when they had more certainty about their future. Still, lying beside Karga each night, feeling her warmth and hearing her steady breathing, filled Jonas with a contentment he had never known. One morning in early April, Jonas was working on repairing the chicken coop when he heard the sound of a single horse approaching. He tensed, his hand moving to the hammer at his belt, which could serve as a weapon if needed. Karga, who had been weeding the garden, straightened and moved quickly toward the house, ready to hide if necessary. But the rider who came over the ridge was not one of the bounty hunters. It was a woman, middle-aged and dressed in practical traveling clothes, riding a sturdy mare. She raised a hand in greeting as she approached, and something about her open, friendly demeanor made Jonas relax slightly. "Hello there," the woman called as she reined in her horse. "You must be Jonas Crawford. I am Evelyn Marsh, circuit judge for this district. I apologize for the unannounced visit, but I was in the area and thought I should check in on some of the more remote homesteads." Jonas set down his hammer and approached cautiously. A circuit judge was not necessarily an enemy, but they represented the law, and the law was not currently on their side. "Judge Marsh, what can I do for you?" Evelyn dismounted and stretched, wincing slightly. "First, you can offer me some water if you have it. That is a long ride from Millbrook. Second, you can tell me if the rumors I have been hearing are true." "What rumors would those be?" Jonas asked carefully, leading her to the well and drawing up a bucket of cold water. Evelyn drank deeply, then fixed Jonas with a shrewd gaze. "Rumors that you are harboring a fugitive orc. Rumors that you have been seen with a green-skinned woman working your fields. Rumors that you lied to a group of bounty hunters who came through here looking for that same orc." Jonas felt his blood turn to ice, but he kept his expression neutral. "And what if those rumors were true? Would you arrest me? Turn her over to those thugs who want to collect their blood money?" To his surprise, Evelyn smiled. "No, actually. I would ask you to introduce me to her, and then I would explain why those bounty hunters have no legal authority and why the Border Council's orders are not worth the paper they are written on." Jonas stared at her, not quite daring to hope. "What do you mean?" Evelyn set down the water dipper and pulled a folded document from her saddlebag. "I mean that I have been doing some research into the law regarding orcs and interspecies relations. The Border Council likes to act as if they have the authority to issue bounties and authorize hunts, but in fact, their jurisdiction is limited to the immediate border zone. An orc who has entered human territory beyond that zone, especially one who has been exiled by their own people and is not engaged in any violent or criminal activity, is entitled to the same legal protections as any other resident. The Council cannot order their capture or deportation without due process, which includes a formal hearing and evidence of wrongdoing." "So Karga is safe?" Jonas asked, hardly able to believe what he was hearing. "Those men cannot take her?" "Not legally, no," Evelyn confirmed. "Of course, that assumes she has somewhere to live and someone to vouch for her character. If she were to be, say, employed by a reputable landowner, someone with ties to the community and a good reputation, that would go a long way toward establishing her legal right to be here." Jonas felt a grin spread across his face, hope blooming in his chest like spring flowers. I think I know just the landowner who would be willing to employ her. Would you like to meet her? I would be delighted, Evelyn said warmly. Jonas led her to the house, where Karga was waiting by the door, her posture tense and ready for flight. Karga, Jonas said gently, this is Judge Evelyn Marsh. She is here to help us. Over the next hour, Evelyn explained the legal situation in detail, answering Karga's questions and outlining what steps they needed to take to ensure her safety. She would need to register with the territorial government, establish residency at Jonas's ranch, and be available if any formal charges were ever brought against her, which Evelyn thought unlikely given that she had committed no crime in human lands. She would also need someone to serve as her sponsor, vouching for her character and taking legal responsibility for her actions. I will do it, Jonas said immediately. I will sponsor her, take responsibility, whatever is needed. Evelyn smiled at him, a knowing look in her eyes. I thought you might. There is one other thing, though. If you two were to be married, that would establish her legal status even more firmly. A spouse cannot be deported without their partner's consent, and the bond of marriage carries significant weight in territorial law. Jonas and Karga exchanged glances, and Jonas saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes, the love and hope and certainty that this was what they both wanted. Would you marry us? Jonas asked. Right now, if Karga is willing. Karga nodded, her eyes bright with tears. Yes. Yes, I would marry you, Jonas Crawford, if you will have me. I will have you, Jonas said, taking her hands in his. Today, tomorrow, and every day after. I love you, Karga. I love you too, Karga whispered. Evelyn pulled out another document, this one a marriage certificate, and filled it out with their names and information. Then, there in the simple ranch house with the spring sunlight streaming through the windows, she performed a brief ceremony that bound Jonas Crawford and Karga together as husband and wife. They exchanged vows, simple words of love and commitment, and when Evelyn pronounced them married, Jonas kissed his wife with all the joy and passion that had been building in his heart for weeks. Congratulations, Evelyn said warmly, signing the certificate and handing it to them. You are now legally married and protected under territorial law. Those bounty hunters will have no claim on Karga, and if they try anything, you let me know immediately. I will be very happy to explain the law to them. She stayed for dinner, sharing stories and advice, and by the time she rode off into the evening, Jonas felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Karga was safe. They were married. Their future, once so uncertain, now stretched ahead with promise. That night, Jonas and Karga lay together in the loft bed, properly married and finally able to express the full depth of their feelings without reservation or fear. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with reverence and care. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked about their plans, their dreams, the life they would build together. I never thought I could be this happy, Karga murmured, tracing lazy patterns on Jonas's chest. After my exile, I thought my life was over, that I would die alone in the wilderness. But you found me, Jonas. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, Jonas corrected gently. You brought me back to life, Karga. This ranch was just a collection of buildings and land before you came. Now it is a home again, our home. We will make it something special, something our children and grandchildren will be proud of. Children, Karga repeated, wonder in her voice. You really think we could have children? I do not see why not, Jonas said. Maybe they will be human, maybe they will be orc, maybe they will be something in between. But they will be ours, and they will be loved, and that is all that matters. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and when Jonas woke the next morning to find Karga still beside him, her green skin glowing in the early light, her face peaceful in sleep, he felt a gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. They had been given a gift, a chance at happiness despite all the forces that should have kept them apart, and he was determined not to waste it. The weeks and months that followed were the happiest of Jonas's life. He and Karga worked the ranch together, expanding their herd, planting crops, making improvements to the house and barns. Word of their marriage spread through the community, and while there were some who disapproved, who muttered about interspecies relationships and the corruption of human purity, there were others who came to visit, curious and eventually accepting. Martha from the general store became a regular visitor, bringing supplies and gossip and her own brand of no-nonsense acceptance. A few other families from the surrounding area stopped by to meet Karga, and most went away with their prejudices challenged, if not completely erased. Karga's kindness and work ethic won over more hearts than any argument could have, and slowly, grudgingly, the community began to accept that Jonas Crawford had married an orc and that the world had not ended. The bounty hunters did return once, about 2 months after the wedding. Jonas and Karga were working in the field when the 3 men rode up, Garrett in the lead with his scarred face set in a scowl. Jonas straightened, moving to place himself between the men and Karga, his hand resting on the rifle he now carried when working outside. "We heard you got married," Garrett said without preamble. "To the orc we were hunting. That is a bold move, Crawford, stupid but bold." "Her name is Karga Crawford and she is my wife," Jonas said evenly. "She is here legally, registered with the territorial government and under the protection of the law. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with Judge Evelyn Marsh." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "The judge has no authority over council business." "Actually, she does," came a new voice, and Jonas turned to see Evelyn herself riding up the track, her timing impeccable. "The Border Council's jurisdiction ends at the border zone. Karga Crawford is a registered resident of this territory, legally married to a landowner, and has committed no crime. If you attempt to detain or harass her, I will have you arrested for kidnapping and assault. Do I make myself clear?" The 3 bounty hunters stared at Evelyn, then at Jonas and Karga, clearly calculating their options. Finally, Garrett spat on the ground and wheeled his horse around. "This is not over," he growled. "Actually, it is," Evelyn said calmly. "And if you come onto this property again without legal cause, it will be considered trespassing and I will prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. Now get out of my district." The men rode off, and Jonas let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Evelyn dismounted and walked over to where he and Karga stood, a satisfied smile on her face. "I happened to be in the area," she said innocently. "Thought I would check on how you 2 were settling in. Good thing, it seems." "Very good thing," Jonas agreed fervently. "Thank you, Evelyn. We owe you more than we can ever repay." "Just be happy," Evelyn said simply. "Be happy and be good to each other and raise children who know that love is more important than fear. That will be payment enough." She stayed for lunch, chatting about legal matters and territory politics, and by the time she left, Jonas felt even more secure in the knowledge that they were protected, that the law was on their side. The bounty hunters did not return after that, and Jonas heard later that they had moved on to easier targets, giving up on the chase that had become too expensive and too legally complicated. Summer arrived in full, and the ranch flourished. The crops grew tall and green, the cattle multiplied, and Jonas and Karga fell into an easy rhythm of life and work. They laughed together, worked together, made love under the stars on warm summer nights, and built a partnership that felt unbreakable. Jonas had never been happier, had never felt more complete, and he knew from the light in Karga's eyes that she felt the same. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Karga reached over and took Jonas's hand. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice nervous but excited. Jonas turned to face her fully, his heart picking up speed at her tone. "What is it?" Karga smiled, radiant and joyful. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment Jonas could not speak, could not process the words. Then joy exploded through him, so intense it was almost painful, and he pulled Karga into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he repeated, the words sounding like a miracle. "We are going to have a baby." They held each other as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Jonas felt like his life had come full circle. He had lost his parents, had been alone and adrift, and then Karga had come into his life, shivering in the cold, and he had wrapped his mother's shawl around her shoulders. That single act of kindness had led to this, to love and marriage and the promise of new life, and Jonas could not imagine any other path he would rather have walked. The pregnancy was not easy. Karga suffered from sickness in the early months, and Jonas hovered anxiously, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. He took over most of the heavy work on the ranch, insisting that she rest, though Karga was stubborn and refused to be completely idle. They argued about it sometimes, loving disagreements that always ended in laughter and kisses. As her belly grew, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Jonas built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth and perfect, and Karga sewed blankets and tiny clothes from soft fabric that Martha brought from town. They debated names endlessly, trying to find something that would honor both their heritages, that would be strong and beautiful and full of hope. In early March, as winter was beginning to loosen its grip and the first signs of spring were appearing, Karga went into labor. Jonas had arranged for a midwife, a kind older woman named Sarah who had delivered half the babies in the territory, and she arrived quickly when Jonas rode to fetch her. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Jonas feared he would lose both Karga and the baby, but Sarah was skilled and calm, and finally, just as dawn was breaking, their daughter was born. She was perfect, tiny and wrinkled and squalling with healthy lungs, her skin a soft jade green that was lighter than Karga's but darker than human. She had small, barely visible tusks and pointed ears like her mother, but her eyes, when they opened, were the same brown as Jonas's. She was a perfect blend of both of them, a living symbol of their love and the bridge they had built between their peoples. "She is beautiful," Karga whispered, exhausted but glowing as she held their daughter to her chest. "What should we name her?" Jonas looked down at his wife and child, at the two people who had become his entire world, and felt a completeness that transcended words. "Hope," he said softly. "We should name her Hope, because that is what she is, what you both are. My hope for a better future, for a world where love matters more than fear." "Hope Crawford," Karga said, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, little Hope. Welcome to the world." They sat together as the sun rose, flooding the room with golden light, a new family beginning their story. Jonas thought back to that cold day in the mountain pass, to the moment he had chosen kindness over fear, and he knew with absolute certainty that it had been the best decision he had ever made. Karga had been shivering in the cold when he wrapped his mother's shawl around the orc girl's shoulders, and in doing so, he had wrapped himself in a future more bright and full of love than anything he could have imagined. The years that followed were good ones. Hope grew strong and healthy, a bright, curious child who loved the ranch and the animals and the wide, open spaces of the mountains. 2 years after Hope was born, Karga gave birth to a son, a sturdy boy with more human features but his mother's green skin, whom they named Thomas after Jonas's father. The ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the territory as a place of quality livestock and honest dealings, and the Crawford family became respected members of the community. There were still those who disapproved, who muttered about the corrupting influence of mixed marriages, but they were a minority, and their voices grew quieter as the years passed. More and more orcs began to drift into human territories, seeking refuge from the constant warfare of the clans, and many found acceptance and new lives. Jonas and Karga's marriage became a symbol of what was possible, proof that the old hatreds did not have to define the future. Judge Evelyn Marsh remained a friend and ally, visiting regularly and watching Hope and Thomas grow with the affection of an honorary grandmother. Martha from the general store became a fixture in their lives, always ready with supplies or advice or simply a friendly ear. Other families in the area began to follow Jonas and Karga's example, opening their homes and their hearts to orcs seeking a new way of life. And slowly, gradually, the culture of the frontier began to change. On the 10th anniversary of the day Jonas had found Karga in the storm, they stood together on their porch, watching Hope and Thomas play in the yard with the easy joy of children who had never known hatred or fear. Jonas had his arm around Karga's waist and she leaned into him, as comfortable and familiar as breathing. "Do you ever regret it?" Jonas asked softly. "Leaving your clan, coming here, building this life with me?" Karga turned to look at him, her amber eyes warm with love and certainty. "Never. Not for a single moment. You saved my life that day, Jonas, but more than that, you gave me a reason to live. You showed me that there is more to this world than war and hate, that love is real and worth fighting for. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Jonas kissed her soft and sweet, a reaffirmation of the vows they had made all those years ago. "I love you, Karga Crawford, today, tomorrow, and every day after." "And I love you, Jonas Crawford," Karga replied, "always and forever." They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, their children's laughter ringing through the air, and Jonas felt a peace so profound, it brought tears to his eyes. This was what his mother had meant when she spoke of kindness multiplying, of sharing love without fear of loss. He had wrapped a shawl around a shivering orc girl's shoulders, and in return, she had wrapped him in a life richer and fuller than any he could have dreamed. The ranch would be passed down to their children someday, and their children to theirs, a legacy not just of land and livestock but of the courage to choose love over fear, kindness over cruelty, hope over despair. And it had all started with one simple act of compassion on a cold winter day, when a human man saw an orc girl in need and chose to help rather than turn away. As the years continued to pass, the Crawford Ranch became more than just a home. It became a sanctuary, a place where those fleeing violence and prejudice could find shelter and acceptance. Jonas and Karga never turned away anyone in need, whether orc, human, or any of the other peoples who made their way to the frontier. They taught their children the same values that had guided them, the belief that every life had worth, that kindness was never wasted, that love could bridge any divide. Hope grew into a beautiful young woman, strong like her mother and kind like her father, with a gift for healing that made her sought after throughout the territory. Thomas became a skilled rancher and craftsman, expanding the family's holdings and building bridges of trade and friendship with the orc clans that had begun to settle in the surrounding areas. Both children married, Hope to a human farmer and Thomas to an orc woman from the northern mountains, and they gave Jonas and Karga grandchildren who carried forward the family's legacy of acceptance and love. Jonas lived to see the day when laws were passed protecting interspecies marriages, when orcs were granted full citizenship rights in the territories, when the old hatreds finally began to give way to a new understanding. He lived to see his grandchildren play with both human and orc friends without a second thought, to see communities where the two peoples lived side by side in peace. And through it all, he had Karga by his side, his partner, his love, his best friend. When Jonas was an old man, his hair white and his hands gnarled with age but his spirit still strong, he would sometimes sit on the porch in the evening and think back to that winter day when everything changed. He would remember the fear in Karga's eyes, the cold that threatened to claim her, the weight of his mother's shawl as he wrapped it around her shoulders. And he would remember the choice he made in that moment, the decision to be kind rather than cruel, to help rather than harm, to open his heart rather than close it. That choice had defined the rest of his life, had led to every good thing he had experienced. It had brought him love and family, purpose and meaning, a legacy that would outlive him by generations. And as he sat there, with Karga's hand in his and the sounds of their descendants filling the air around them, Jonas Crawford knew with absolute certainty that he had lived a good life, a life worth living, a life that had mattered. The sun would set on the ranch every evening, just as it always had, but the love that Jonas and Karga had built would endure, a light shining through the darkness, proof that even in the coldest winter, even in the face of the deepest prejudice and fear, kindness and love could not just survive but thrive. And it had all started with a Shawl, a shivering girl, and a man who chose to see a person in need rather than an enemy to fear. Their story became legend in the territories, told and retold by parents to children, by elders to the young, a reminder of what was possible when people chose courage over cowardice, love over hate. The Crawford name became synonymous with integrity and acceptance, and the ranch became a symbol of hope for all those seeking a better way. And when Jonas and Karga finally passed, many years later, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they went peacefully, their hands clasped together as they had been for so much of their lives. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a marker that bore both their names and a simple inscription: "Love conquers all." The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each new steward adding their own chapter to the family story, but always staying true to the values that Jonas and Karga had established. And on cold winter days, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled down from the mountains, the people of the Crawford Ranch would wrap themselves in warm shawls and remember the story of how it all began, of a man who chose kindness and a woman who found hope, and of the love that grew from a single act of compassion on the coldest of days. Their descendants spread throughout the territories, carrying the Crawford name and the Crawford values into new places, building new bridges between peoples, creating new stories of love and acceptance. And always, at the heart of every story, was the memory of Jonas and Karga, of the choice they made and the life they built, a testament to the enduring power of love to transform not just individual lives but entire worlds. The shawl that Jonas had wrapped around Karga's shoulders on that first day was carefully preserved, passed down as a family heirloom, a tangible reminder of where they had come from and what they believed. Each generation would add their own story to its history, their own memory of love and kindness, until the shawl became more than just a piece of cloth, but a symbol of everything the Crawford family stood for. And so the story of Jonas and Karga lived on, not just in the memories of those who knew them, but in the very fabric of the territories themselves, woven into the culture and the laws and the hearts of all those who believed that the world could be better, that love was stronger than hate, that kindness would always matter. It was a story that began with a shivering orc girl and a human man with a kind heart, and it ended with a legacy that would endure for generations, a light shining in the darkness, showing the way forward for all those brave enough to follow. The ranch stood as it always had, solid and enduring, a home for all who needed one, a sanctuary for all who sought peace. And on cold winter nights, when the fire burned low and the family gathered together, they would tell the story again, of how it all began, of the moment when everything changed, of the day that Jonas Crawford wrapped his mother's shawl around an orc girl's shoulders and in doing so, changed not just his own life but the course of history itself. It was a story of love triumphant, of courage in the face of fear, of the simple truth that kindness, no matter how small, can ripple outward in ways we cannot imagine, touching lives and changing worlds. It was the story of Jonas and Karga Crawford, and it was a story that would never be forgotten, a testament to the enduring power of love to overcome all obstacles, and to the hope that, even in the darkest times, there is always light if we are brave enough to reach for it. And so their story reached its end, not with tragedy or loss but with triumph and joy, with a family that spanned generations, and a love that had changed the world. Jonas and Karga had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, had built a life together against all odds, and had left behind a legacy that would inspire countless others to follow in their footsteps, to choose love over fear, to open their hearts to those who were different, to believe that a better world was possible. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would carry that legacy forward, building on the foundation that Jonas and Karga had laid, creating new stories of acceptance and understanding, forging new bonds between peoples who had once been enemies. And always at the center of it all was the memory of that cold winter day, of a man who saw someone in need and chose to help, of a woman who found refuge and love in the most unexpected of places, and of the shawl that bound them together, a symbol of warmth and kindness and the enduring power of the human heart to love without limits. The territories continued to grow and change, becoming a place where all peoples could live together in harmony, where the old divisions were slowly erased, and new communities built on mutual respect and understanding took their place. And whenever someone asked how it had all begun, how the peace had been achieved, the answer was always the same. It started with two people who loved each other despite all the reasons they should not have, who chose to build bridges instead of walls, who believed that love was stronger than hate. It started with Jonas and Karga Crawford, and it would endure as long as there were people willing to choose kindness, willing to open their hearts, willing to believe that the world could be better. Their story was complete, their lives fully lived, their legacy secure. And in the end, that was all anyone could hope for. A life well lived, love freely given and received, and a world left better than they found it. The sun rose and set over the Crawford Ranch, day after day, year after year, century after century, and the love that Jonas and Karga had shared continued to shine, a beacon of hope for all who sought it, a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness, like wrapping a shawl around the shoulders of a shivering stranger, could change everything. And that was the greatest gift they could have given, the most enduring legacy. The knowledge that love, true love, knows no boundaries, recognizes no divisions, and can conquer any obstacle if we are brave enough to embrace it.